Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Today, we're looking at how it's our responsibility to provide a safe environment for contractors and visitors to our workplaces and how best to meet this requirement. I'm Alex Smith. I lead marketing for Citation Canada. I'm joined today by our lead health and safety consultant, Shane. Shane, can you go ahead and tell everyone a bit about yourself?
Everybody, my name's Shane. As Alex mentioned, I'm the lead health and safety consultant here at Citation Canada. I've got some previous working experience in a bunch of different industries: construction, sales, food production, among a few of them. And yeah, just really excited to talk about contractor and visitor safety today.
Awesome. Glad to have you. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. We'll be recording today's session. We will share that out to all of you in the next day or two so that you can revisit it or share it with your colleagues. Do feel free to ask questions via the Q&A functionality in Zoom. We've also collected some questions through the registration form that we'll aim to get to at the end of today's session, time permitting. And just a little bit about Citation Canada, if this is your first time joining us, we are a Canadian headquartered software and services company specializing in HR and health and safety management and compliance. We've been helping thousands of businesses across Canada to keep their teams safe, engaged, and set up for success for over 15 years. So we help organizations navigate the complexities of compliance and build great workplaces. So Shane, tell us what we're going to cover today.
Well, as we've said, today we're going to be talking about contractor and visitor safety. On the agenda, we'll start with legal obligations, due diligence, and the duty of care. Then we'll move on to the contractor and visitor life cycle, covering from before they enter the workplace until after they leave. Then we'll discuss some of the technological advantages that can be leveraged to promote compliance related to visitors and contractors. And we'll close with some key takeaways and a brief Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks for that overview. So let's start, as you said, with what's required. Can you tell us about the duty of care and some of the risks involved in allowing contractors and visitors into the workplace?
Definitely. When considering how to manage contractors and visitors, it really all comes down to due diligence, which is always a legal obligation. Every employer in Canada needs to ensure that they can prove that they did everything reasonably within their power to keep their workplace as safe as possible. And when contractors and visitors are in the workplace, they need to be protected in similar ways as employees are. You also need to consider how your employees may be affected by contractors and visitors when they're in the workplace. From a moral perspective, most reasonable people would agree that if someone was deemed responsible for a situation or for a group of people, the right thing for them to do is to prevent those people from harm. If there's a general responsibility for an employer to manage their own workplace safely, it's reasonable for contractors and visitors to expect to be safe while they're in the workplace as well. I can appreciate that these legal considerations and planning activities can seem like a lot of work, but occupational health and safety really relies on laying a foundation of best practices. If employers take time to carefully plan how they address these situations and create a compliant OHS program implementation becomes easier and easier over time.
And as you said, it's important to remember that it's a legal obligation, but it's so much more than that as well. In that light, what about some consequences of not upholding these obligations and responsibilities?
Yes, there's a few different consequences to not protecting contractors and visitors. If a contractor or visitor is injured while in a workplace, not only will there likely be legal consequences, there's also likely related moral failings, and in turn, there's going to be consequences related to the perception others have of your workplace. Things like fines and penalties, stop work orders, and even arrests can stem from an employer not fulfilling their legal due diligence responsibilities. However, because visitors and contractors are external, doing wrong by them also opens the company up to additional scrutiny. Injured contractors will likely be upset that they trusted an employer who did them wrong, and they can tell other contractors not to work with that organization because they have poor OHS practices. Because of the associated moral failings, often the general public doesn't look favorably on workplaces with OHS issues, and consequences can relate to decreased business opportunities as well. An unfortunate recent example of this involved a contracted worker who tragically fell to their death while working on a roof. The company did not train the worker who died on working at heights requirements, and although personal protective equipment was available on site, the worker's supervisor did not require them to wear it when they should have. Moving forward, it's going to be very difficult for companies like this to secure contracts and to secure contracted help and contracts when there's documented proof that they didn't keep everyone safe in the past.
Oh, that's a real tragedy, of course, Shane, and exactly why it's important to keep this top of mind. So for today's session, we're going to go through some reminders and best practices based on the life cycle of a visitor or contractor passing through a workplace or doing work for an employer. So practically speaking, both visitors and contractors experience similar but not identical steps. So for example, visitors generally do not complete work, so associated training and onboarding is less stringent compared to contractors. There are four main stages in the life cycle of a visitor or a contractor coming into the workplace. The pre-site approval stage involves several important checks related to documentation and confirming credentials. The onboarding and training stage involves visitors and contractors reviewing internal documents such as policies and procedures and closing gaps in training requirements. And then while on site, the needs of visitors and contractors will vary greatly depending on the nature of their business. And lastly, the post-visit stage involves any debriefing, offboarding, and reviewing necessary to ensure due diligence is upheld. So that'll be how we go through it. Shane, why don't we start by going over what's involved in pre-approval?
Pre-approval involves several important checks for both contractors and visitors. The first step is always going to be ensuring the visitor or the contractor can legally come into the workplace to do what they need to do. If the situation simply involves a client coming in to see how operations take place, and that person's always going to remain with a competent supervisor, they typically don't require any specific insurance or credential. If the situation involves the need for contractors to come into the workplace to complete work, at minimum, they need to be insured with the applicable insurance boards, such as WSIB in Ontario. As Alex mentioned, visitors don't typically complete work, so they don't require insurance to protect against work-related injuries. However, as an employer, you should consider if you're insured against situations involving non-employees being in the workplace. One thing that shouldn't be overlooked is the age of the visitor. It's not crucial that you know exactly how old somebody is, but if they're under the age of 18, there could be legal considerations that extend beyond what's required of anybody over the age of 18, depending on the nature of the work that's associated with your workplace. I know tomorrow's Take Your Child to Work Day, so these types of considerations should be going on across the country if grade 9 students are going to be welcomed into a variety of different workplaces.
Yeah, great point. So insurance is critical, but what about other qualifications as well?
Yeah, it might go without saying, but it's important to ensure a prospective contractor is qualified to complete the work that they need to do. Contractors are typically hired to complete specialized work that current employees are not qualified for, such as things like electrical. These types of workers require specific qualifications to legally provide services, so it's crucial for employers to confirm that these qualifications exist prior to allowing the contractor into the workplace. Also, beyond insurance and qualifications, contractor pre-approval requires review of their occupational health and safety documents to ensure that they also meet legal requirements. In general, when you're hiring a contractor, it's really important to ensure that they have the minimum required policies in place under applicable legislation. So things like health and safety policies, violence and harassment policies, and women's safety policies should definitely be reviewed. In addition to policies, it's also important for employers to consider whether a prospective contractor has a complete occupational health and safety program, because without an OHS program, the contractor's operations might not be compliant. As an employer, you should never welcome anyone into the workplace to do work if there's known compliance gaps in the way that they operate.
So it sounds like documentation standards and requirements are pretty similar for contractors as they are for employees. So contractors are employers too, and so it stands to reason that they're expected to meet some similar legislative requirements. Is there anything else that employers should be considering when working to pre-approve contractors or visitors?
Yes, I think there's two other aspects of working relationships that extend to these occupational health and safety pre-approval considerations, those being transparency and trust. By allowing a contractor to enter and work in your workplace, you're saying that you trust that they're not going to endanger anyone when they're completing that work. To ensure this, it's important for employers to request a transparent history of working incidents from contractors. If they're not willing to be transparent with you, to me, that's a pretty big red flag. If they provide you with an incident history and there's proof of repeated incidents or proof of incidents occurring and no corrective actions following, I would say that's also cause for concern. Transparency and trust are also implicated in visitor pre-approval. Visitors are not bound by any OHS program, so additional steps must be taken to ensure that they're going to act safely when they're in your workplace. Visitor policies that clearly lay out expectations, rules, and responsibilities must be signed by visitors before they enter the workplace. If they're not willing to agree to simple safety terms, then they shouldn't be permitted to enter.
And what about fitting contractors and visitors into your normal operations?
Yes, after legal considerations are made, operational limitations should also be reviewed. So for example, if an electrical contractor is coming in to complete work on a piece of equipment and they're only available at certain times on certain days, the area of your facility should be shut down. The area of your facility where that equipment is located should be shut down to allow for the equipment to be worked on. Overall, if scheduling conflicts don't allow for the workplace to be in as safe as possible condition for both workers and for contractors, then the work should probably not take place. Employers should, of course, also consider this for visitors. Because visitors don't complete work, there likely isn't any need to shut down operations. But whenever visitors are in the workplace, it's crucial to consider whether any adversely risky activities are happening during that time. If there's potential to expose a visitor to unnecessary risk, then the visit should also be considered for another time or place.
Makes sense. So you've identified when they should come and they're approved to be on site. What comes next?
So once a contractor or visitor has been approved, then the next step is to prepare them for the hazards and risks that are unique to your workplace. This is best done by putting them through a standardized onboarding process. Onboarding for contractors and visitors is going to look much the same as onboarding for new employees. It's just going to have a different, more narrow scope. Things like ensuring workplace required PPE is worn by contractors may seem basic, but if an employer were to overlook it and not train contracted workers when and where PPE is required, there's not going to be fulfilling due diligence responsibilities, just like in the tragic example I mentioned a moment ago. Written safe operating procedures are extremely useful in this regard. Having standardized processes written down means that they can easily be shared with anyone to ensure that required steps are followed. Ultimately, it's best to be as exhaustive as possible when you're sharing procedural information. Otherwise, anything that's not explicitly covered or discussed could leave a compliance gap and expose the employer. In terms of formal policies, at minimum, contracted workers must review and agree to adhere to your health and safety policy and your violence and harassment policy. These are foundational aspects of OHS that can never be overlooked. Everyone working in the workplace must follow these requirements, and that includes contractors who are only there for a short time.
So what I'm hearing is documentation and signed agreements are very important. What about other aspects like training?
Yeah, training is much the same as procedural review. To uphold due diligence and to do everything reasonably possible to keep all workers safe, contractors should also complete company-specific training that's related to the work that they might be doing, including violence and harassment prevention, prior to entering the workplace. This way, an employer can provide the contractors with as much information as possible to ensure that they can work safely and they're not going to endanger anybody else. Employees are required to complete this training prior to beginning work, so contractors should likely do it too. Some other important procedures to consider training contractors on are how contractors report incidents or when specific processes like lockout tagout should be followed.
And just like an employee, they need to be ready for anything, right? So what about emergencies? Do employers need to provide contractors and visitors with anything specific there?
Yes, emergency preparation is definitely important. All contractors should be provided copies of all emergency procedures that apply to the working areas where they're going to be located, as well as a map of the facility with primary and secondary evacuation routes noted on it. If there's any alarms or warning systems in your facility, all contractors should know what those things mean too. It's also important to ensure contractors are trained on evacuations. Before they begin work, an evacuation drill and a shelter in place drill should be held with the contractor to prepare them for emergency situations.
And do visitors require that same level of detail?
No, I wouldn't say so. Visitor best practices are far less stringent than they are for contractors. As we mentioned earlier, developing and implementing a comprehensive visitor policy is a great way to simplify visitor onboarding. By reviewing all related aspects of OHS that pertain to visitors and including all that necessary information in a single policy, there's going to be a lot less need for additional paperwork. Visitors should typically review and sign all related documents on the day of the visit. This way, the employer can assure the information is fresh in the visitor's mind and that they're as aware as possible of all related aspects of health and safety in your workplace. Because visitors should always be accompanied when they're in the workplace, they're also under company supervision at all times. This greatly decreases the need for visitor acknowledgement and adherence to a policy because the person supervising them retains all responsibilities to keep them safe. They can tell the visitor where not to go, what not to touch, prevent the visitor from entering prohibited areas if they're not wearing specific PPE, and overall protect the visitor as much as possible. Perhaps the most crucial piece of information to include in this policy is that visitors must follow the instruction of company officials without exception. If they agree to follow this requirement and the company has done their due diligence in ensuring the supervisor is sufficiently trained and the workplace is otherwise safe, the visitor should be sufficiently protected.
That's a great point. So even though the visitor's responsibility is lower, the company's responsibility doesn't change.
Exactly. The duty of care always remains, it just shifts in how it's applied. One last thing that I wanted to mention before we move on, another piece of redundancy to implement is a sign in and sign out process. This is really simple, but it provides clear proof of when anyone entered or left the workplace, which is really important if an incident were to occur.
So now that they're in the workplace, what does good management look like while contractors or visitors are actually on site?
Well, practically speaking, contractors are experts in their field, and therefore they should know how to do their jobs as safely as possible. When they're doing their job within a client's workplace, they're expected to follow their own safety standards as well as the safety standards of the organization that they're working for. This is one of the reasons why aspects of the pre-job stage are important to address before the contractor arrives. Contractors must know if they need to amend their processes to work within the requirements of a given workplace, so as much advance notice as possible is always going to keep things running smoothly. When contractors are setting up to work, a supervisor from that working area should be present to ensure that the contractors aren't going to interfere with anybody else in the workplace. If changes are required, then the head contractor, the supervisor, and either the health and safety committee or the representative should collaborate to discuss next steps. Changes should, of course, be documented, and then those documents should be retained and reviewed whenever planning future work.
Sounds like a lot of internal communication is going to be necessary to make sure this all goes according to plan. So any best practices you can share on that?
Yeah, definitely. Supervisors in the area around where a contractor sets up should definitely inform the workers who may be affected of any temporary changes that are going to be in place while the contracted worker is there. Some communication can be shared prior to the contractor arriving, but in most cases, doing a general announcement that the contractor is going to be in the workplace on a specific date, followed by a morning debrief, toolbox talk, or a safety meeting held on the day that the contractor is present. This helps ensure that employees don't forget anything while working within these temporary arrangements. The one universal rule that should never be overlooked in any such discussion is that workers are not to interfere with any work that's being completed by contractors, because interference could lead to hazardous exposure for the worker, and it could also have negative impacts on the contractor's activities. For visitors, workers should be told that a visitor is going to be present on the day of the visit. This ensures that there's no surprises and workers are capable of completing all required health and safety activities without forgetting or overlooking anything.
Lots to consider. It all seems to fall in line with the underlying theme of planning and process. So if the OHS program is well structured and everyone is aware of their responsibilities, any task can be completed safely when even contractors and visitors are around. So now once the contractor finishes the job or the visitor leaves, what should happen then?
Well, that's typically described as the post-visit stage, which is something that some employers occasionally overlook. After a contractor or visitor has left the premises, the overall experience should be reviewed. By taking time to review it, specifically how the job or the visit fit within the OHS program, employers can improve contractor and visitor involvement in that program for the future. All available information should be collected and reviewed, as we've been saying, which is another reason why documentation is really important. Regarding visitors, the supervisor who guided the visitor should be consulted regarding how they thought the visit went. Their perspective can provide direct insight into how the OHS program can be improved for visitors. These conversations should happen as soon as possible after the visit to ensure everything remains fresh in their mind. And similarly, if any employees are working around contractors, they might also have insight into the experience that could also improve your OHS program. Even something simple like standardizing that a required form be sent to a contractor earlier in the process can have positive ripple effects on the broader activities within the program. To go above and beyond, employers can also consider implementing something like a contractor experience survey. Contractors speaking to their own experience can provide insight into areas or topics that might have been overlooked. Contractors are also likely to appreciate having the opportunity to provide feedback, which is going to strengthen the business relationship.
And not every visit is planned, we know that. So what about dealing with unexpected visitors like a walk-in off the street, a sales rep, or even an upset customer?
Yes, people drop in unexpectedly for a number of reasons. They could just be curious, they could be a prospective client or customer looking for more information, or they could be a solicitor looking for business. There's not really any way to know what their intentions are until they arrive, but employers can always plan ahead and prepare for a number of possible situations. Similar planning activities to what we've been discussing still apply, including thorough policy and procedures for managing unexpected visitors. Employees need to know how to approach these situations and who to escalate concerns to if unexpected visitors make unique requests or if they act outside the norm. Ensuring frontline workers are comfortable in unexpected situations is crucial. Employers can prepare them with training on how to manage unruly individuals and how to de-escalate tense situations. It's also really important to ensure that these frontline employees have the awareness, the confidence, and the autonomy to remove themselves from hazardous situations if it ever were to reach that point.
Yeah, we've all heard horror stories about conflicts in the workplace turning deadly. It's obviously not always that extreme, but in fact, it's probably more common than we realize for tense situations to arise. Can you share some examples of scenarios to prepare for?
Yes, so harassment in the workplace is a hazard, even if it comes from someone external to the company. Because workplaces know nothing of unexpected visitors prior to their arrival in the workplace, it can be difficult to determine their intentions. Disgruntled family members can seek out employees while at work, or frustrated customers can come looking for answers that they didn't get elsewhere. The possibilities are vast, but the important thing for employers to remember is to focus on standardization and process. Employers must have clear reporting processes and communication channels in place for all frontline employees so they can request assistance whenever they need it. It's also crucial for workers to understand when a conversation crosses the line from being impolite to becoming harassment, which of course can be covered in training. Due diligence means to always review all potential risks, consider all negative scenarios, and work to prevent those things from ever manifesting in the workplace. Because unexpected visitors are essentially potential uncontrolled hazards, employers should build contingencies into their procedures for these potentially harmful situations.
Makes sense. So, Shane, you've given us a lot to think about, but this all sounds like a lot of paperwork and tracking. So, how can companies make all of this easier to manage?
Yeah, OHS is heavily reliant on documentation, and visitor and contractor safety is no different. Citation Canada's Atlas platform facilitates many of the processes discussed today and can also help make visits easier to manage. The risk assessment tool is great for clearly laying out the hazards, risks, and controls involved in any given process. Once a risk assessment is completed, they can then be used to determine which areas of the workplace require improvements and then which other areas may require additional attention. Considering contractors and visitors, some relevant examples could be assessing the risks of violence and harassment when external individuals enter the workplace, assessing the risks of having a visitor pass through a certain area, or assessing the risks of work that's completed by contractors. The Safe Operating Procedure tool standardizes safety procedures in written form. These documents are important for visitors and contractors because they can be distributed to these people to clearly convey the standard practices of your workplace. During the onboarding stage, safety procedures related to topics such as contractors entering a high-risk area, emergency evacuation, or completing work where specific PPE is required can all easily be shared with any external party within the platform. Training has also been mentioned several times throughout this presentation, and the citation safety training area on Atlas is home to many training courses that can help with visitor and contractor safety. The system enables users to share training both internally and externally, which is incredibly helpful when visitors or contractors need to complete training. Of course, training can always be provided to employees at any time to help them improve their ability to work with these groups too. Training records are always retained in the platform, and they can be referenced whenever they're needed. Lastly, the document suite on Atlas is full of useful documents and templates and is home to every client's OHS policies. Policies can easily be shared within the platform or downloaded and shared externally. Atlas also provides a document management system that enables tracking of document sharing, so employers can always prove that they're fulfilling due diligence requirements. Templates for checklists for things like contractor compliance, due diligence best practices, and safety orientations are always available to download, amend, and share with any involved party, and the review or completion of these documents is always going to be tracked.
So for members who already have Atlas, these are features they can start using right now. And if you're not yet a member of our health and safety solution, I'd say that's 4 great reasons to become one.
Yes, the Atlas platform is all about making occupational health and safety easier, more consistent, and most importantly, compliant. I'm also excited to announce that in the coming months, Citation Canada is launching a new contractor management tool on Atlas Health and Safety. This tool makes moving contractors through the life cycle streamlined and simple. Tasks and stages are tracked, documents are logged, pre-qualification questionnaires can be distributed, and more. The addition of these tools enables Citation health and safety clients to focus on important safety aspects of contractor management to ensure compliance.
Awesome. Excited to see how that helps our clients for sure. So now, Shane, just walk us through your key takeaways before we get into some questions.
Of course, number one, due diligence and duty of care cannot be understated. All employers have a duty to protect everyone in their workplace to every reasonable extent. OHS programs need to be fulsome and consider all aspects of real and potential hazards. So to ensure due diligence, employers should regularly review their program for improvements. Number two, risk assessments are the foundation of all occupational health and safety programming. In order to protect everyone from hazards, employers must understand the risks involved. By completing risk assessments of the real and potential hazards contractors and visitors might encounter, and by assessing the risks related to those hazards, the bigger picture can be understood so all hazards can be controlled effectively. Number three, contractor and visitor onboarding is just as crucial as it is for employees. Information and hazard controls should be provided in advance of anyone entering the workplace because this ensures documentation is complete and sufficient, and these individuals are as prepared as possible for when the time comes. And number four, offboarding and review of each instance where contractors and visitors enter the workplace is one due diligence aspect employers often overlook. By thoroughly reviewing the experience, employers can improve their health and safety program even more.
Awesome. So now let's get into some questions from our audience. Let's start with, how would you manage contractors in a healthcare setting?
In a healthcare setting? Well, the overall process for managing contractors is the same in any workplace. In healthcare specifically, due to the nature of the work, I would focus on defining roles and responsibilities of those contractors and how they'll work within the OHS program and with others in the workplace. Some things that could be overlooked could be ensuring that contractors understand incident reporting, ensuring that they're aware of all communication channels, and ensuring that any risks that they could be exposed to are minimized, especially if they're doing specialized work.
Now, should we ask for a WSIB clearance certificate before the contractor comes to our facility?
Yes, definitely. Before cannot be missed. Just the same as employees in most workplaces need to be covered by insurance, so do contractors. Insurance statuses can differ depending on the contractor, how they operate, and how the contract is structured. So, for example, if a contractor is an individual who has no employees and they're contracted for an extended amount of time and they work a regular schedule, WSIB might not classify them as an independent operator who needs to carry their own insurance. They could be classified as a worker for whom the employer must pay WSIB coverage. Ultimately, if you're unsure about the legality or status of a contractor's insurance coverage, you should reach out to the Workplace Insurance Board in your jurisdiction.
Now, as an example, if I'm a contractor that works on a client's job site, but I also employ subcontractors to assist me and my staff, are there any additional pitfalls or potentially obvious mistakes that me and my team should look out for?
Definitely. Your subcontractors need to be protected by your OHS program. If the majority of the work is contracted and completed in clients' workplaces, those are two big things that I think should be considered when you're writing policies and establishing safe working procedures too. Because you will always be blending your OHS program with your client's program, ensuring every subcontractor understands their responsibilities within both is crucial. You must ensure supervisors are competent, and supervisors should be well aware of what their training, of what training is provided to subcontractors, what subcontractors they might need to supervise are responsible for, and of course, if subcontractors may need support or assistance, how to provide that to them.
Now, what can we do to mitigate liability when we observe a contractor working in a manner that does not follow our safety guidelines?
Ooh. Well, when they're working in your workplace, you have every right to stop them from working unsafely. They're not only could they be endangering themselves, but they could also be endangering your staff. To me, best practice is to ensure that they are provided as much training and information as possible to reduce the chance that they break any rules. But if they still work unsafely despite this, you as an employer have a duty to step in just the same as you would if an employee was working unsafely. Escalation of progressive discipline should always be written into your health and safety policy. And because this document is something that all contractors must review and agree to adhere to, they should understand the consequences. Bottom line, policy sign-off is crucial to enable you to protect your workplace. And if a contractor works outside of safety guidelines, then their actions must be corrected immediately. All workers should know that they need to report contractor issues as well, so leadership can take action to protect the workplace.
This one's somewhat related. So, what happens if they do it their way and are covered under their WSIB? So, our warnings are ignored.
Well, I'm going to assume that when you say they, you're referring to contractors, but if they are ignoring your warnings regarding hazards in your workplace and they're not working safely, they should obviously be reprimanded. In my opinion, repeated behavior like this would warrant not hiring that contractor back and potentially removing them from the workplace immediately, depending on how severe the situation is. Without more context, I can't really suggest any other recourse, but if their way isn't compliant, then either they don't have adequate safety processes in place or they're willfully ignoring them. In either of these cases, they're not upholding their responsibilities within the eternal responsibility framework, which requires all workers to always work safely and never willfully endanger themselves or anybody else. I would never work with anybody who ignores health and safety.
Fair point. Just a couple questions. Sonia asked around the documentation and signed agreements. Can you give some examples of the specific types of documentation that they should look to keep?
Yes. So as we mentioned, the core health and safety policy is really the foundation for all health and safety practices. So that's number one. Number two should be workplace violence and harassment, because again, that's a foundational piece that applies to everybody. And then it will really depend on what they provide you. If they are going to be working within a certain framework and they don't have existing policies within their OHS program, then I would suggest that you provide anything that's within your program to the contractor so they can review it and make sure that they're going to be working safely.
Perfect. One other one that I think probably applies to a lot of businesses we work with. Would you treat a volunteer the same way as a regular employee in terms of onboarding and training, or as a visitor?
Maybe not as a visitor, but more as a contractor. They're providing you services and they're working for you. Just because they're not being paid doesn't mean that occupational health and safety doesn't apply to them. So yes, you in line with contractors, employees being dealt with in a similar way, then volunteers would fall into that same framework.
Perfect. And we have one last one. I know we're at close to time here, but if we can squeeze it in, just how would you manage contractors in the performing arts, particularly musicians who are considered independent contractors? Any specific trainings that they should adhere to?
Yeah, as we've mentioned, it's all about ensuring that the overlap between their health and safety program and your health and safety program covers everything that needs to be covered. Considering that an artist is always working independently and there's not a lot of hazards directly related to their work, I would be as thorough as possible when providing them with documentation and training. Don't overlook anything. Make the conversation as open as possible. And then if they suggest that they are lacking in any specific regard that's significant in your workplace, then make sure that you're providing them with, number one, training on that topic. And then if they need to sign off on any policy that would apply to that situation, make sure that they're signing off on it so that they are held accountable for anything that they do.
Makes sense. I know I said that'd be the last one, but Alyssa has dropped another one in. So if we
That's
have a
okay.
second, any recommendations when the contractor starts work earlier than the regular employee? So potentially on the first day, ask them to start later, and then on following days, keep the sign in book in the area where they are working. Or what would you recommend?
Yeah, that's a good way to go about it. If they're going to be in the workplace alone, I would say making sure that they have some sort of working alone procedures to make sure that there is some level of communication between them and someone outside the workplace to make sure that they're safe and they can communicate if anything were to go wrong. Specifically regarding the sign in, sign out book, if they're going to be the only person signing in and signing out, then yeah, of course, you could just give it to them and have them sign in when they arrive and sign out when they leave. If you have any redundancy in terms of things like security cameras, that could also be checked to consolidate and make sure that they're following the requirements and filling out those documents properly. But yeah, I would say, just as we've said, make it open to however the contractor works. And if there is gaps in the way that they work in terms of specific things like you're signing in and signing out and working alone, then it's up to you to close those gaps.
Makes sense. All right. Well, Real quick, Shane gave you a peek at how our software can support you in managing contractors and visitors safely. Our tools can also support that post-visit survey. We've got a whole team of safety experts like Shane available to provide live phone support. And in some areas to also complete on-site visits to review potential hazards and help you develop the right policies and procedures to ensure safety for everyone who goes to your workplace. Feel free to message here in the chat if you'd like to connect with one of our solutions experts to discuss your needs. With that, we will wrap up today's talk. Thank you for joining us. We hope that you'll come back for our next webinar in December. That'll be an Ask Me Anything style format with one of our HR consultants on upcoming legislative changes related to WMIS and working for workers. There are deadlines coming up in December and early 2026 that might impact your business. So you'll see an email from us soon with more information and a link to sign up. Until then, please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for joining us. Bye, everyone.